Okay, so this is the Integrity Capital Education. And today for the topic, we're going to be talking about making decisions here at Integrity Capital specifically. And so I'm going to try to make this a little bit interactive. I'll go through some content and then maybe pause for questions or clarity and things of that magnitude. So we'll try to make it as interactive as possible. But one of the things that is really important anywhere you go or in any organization is making choices and decisions. Sometimes you have more of a top-weighted approach where all decisions happen up top. In our institution, we're really trying to develop a culture because we're trying to be so proactive for the client. That's really our aim and our goal and our vision, is that we need to have a culture that where people, everybody in the organization is part of the making decision process. Because, you know, we obviously brought you on here because we believe in you. We feel like you're competent, you have the value and ability to make decisions. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about making decisions today. We're going to talk about the different types of decisions. We call type 1, type 2 decisions. We're going to flush that out a little bit to try to clarify that. We'll use some examples of type 1, type 2 decisions. And then we'll talk about just the funnel of making an actual decision that we'll go through. And then we'll try to land the plane with sort of format for how we're going to do things if it falls into what we would call a type 1 decision. So, you know, decisions, we make them all the time. If you guys think about it, I mean, you can't get away from it. I mean, what am I going to eat today? Am I going to get out of bed and work out, or am I going to sleep in? You know, what direction am I going to go into work? You know, you're making a decision on who you're going to marry, who you're going to be friends with, you know, whether you're going to open your mouth or keep your mouth closed in a situation, right? So you're always making decisions all the time. You can't get away from it in your life. And, you know, we've talked about making compounding decisions and those accumulate over time, but decisions always have consequences. You know, we tell our kids that all the time is, you know, you can either have a good consequence or a bad consequence. And you make a decision, there's always a consequence no matter what. And if you think about it, everything really in this world that we live in, that God designed, really is cause and effect. You do something, it has an effect every single time. You can't get away from cause and effect. It's just reality in the world that we live in here today. So what we're trying to do is to foster an environment, and in fact, Lana just did that today with one of our clients. Was she made a decision. She made a choice. She took action on something, and then she received a positive consequence because of that decision. And so what I want to try to do is just spend some time discussing what we would call type 1 versus a type 2 decision. And what I'll do when I walk through this, I'll try to pause at a few points for any feedback or questions or things that we can try to clarify. So when I talk about a type 1 decision, these are going to be decisions that are consequential and probably irreversible or nearly irreversible, okay? Or what we would also call maybe a one-way door. And so once you make the decision, it has a pretty large impact, and it's hard to unwind that depending on what the consequence is. These are typically decisions that should be methodical, they should be careful, they should be done slowly with great deliberation and consultation, okay? So you really can't go back on this. They typically are from a high level perspective when you're thinking about making decisions, and you guys do this in life too. is they're more strategic in nature. They're bigger picture in nature, and they're probably more changing what you are doing versus how you are doing something. Okay, so kind of think about the distinction. It's more high level. It's bigger in nature, has a larger consequence on the outcome of it, has bigger impact. It's probably changing what you are doing versus how you are actually doing something. So I want to hit a pause there for a minute and just maybe get some questions or feedback or thoughts on that before I keep going.
You're asking for questions or?
Yeah, yeah, questions or comments
No,
about that?
I totally agree with that. Something that I work on, I have to work on is, and I always work on it, is when you're making decisions, not to be reactive,
Mhm.
is to think it out and not react
That's
to,
pretty good.
that's one thing that I work on a lot. So just to not be reactive.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
and
really,
that's in my personal life as well.
no, I think that's great. Yeah, that's very true. Just this idea when you're making a decision, you're even making a decision in that moment
Right.
to not be reactive and say, okay, I'm going to hit the pause button for a minute here. That's something that I've had to learn how to do. Failed at it, done a lot better. But, with stuff we deal with clients is not being reactionary, not sort of, jumping the gun when things aren't going the way that we would want it to go, or they respond in the way that we don't think is appropriate. So that's a great point, is just making an actual decision as well, to hit the pause button. Any other
Yeah.
thoughts?
I think it's not just like a case of reactionary, but taking, and it's tough, but take the emotion out of the decision where, you might, look at it as, you know, uh, you have to do something because of, personally, if it's something that personally affects you, like, well, and I guess it's also in the same way reactionary, where it's, you're doing it from an emotional standpoint versus, really in the greater picture, like that second to last bullet point, go strategic, not the emotional response, I guess.
Yeah, that's really good, Tom. So not reacting and making a decision based on the way you feel,
Mhm.
right? But more based upon the facts.
Yeah.
So what is it? What's true, right, about the situation, or what's right about the situation, or what's going on? And so, kind of like Tom, we've been dealing with even on this recent situation is, what do we need to gather? What situation we need to go through? What do we need to do before we get too reactive on the situation? So let's gather facts versus just the feeling. So,
I might echo because we're close. Or we echo. I can wait.
I'll actually go through it, and then you can.
Okay. Sorry, guys. We're in the same room, so we echo.
Yeah, so you could just do that here. Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So I was thinking about it, like, what about the why behind the decision? So why are we making the decision, and who will it impact, et cetera, the strategic part. Or sometimes where I get in another tough spot is when I have to make a very fast decision that could impact many people besides myself.
Very true.
That's why I struggle, where it's like, so if I say yes or if I say no, who is it going to impact and why? But then it's almost calculating the long-term implications of that decision. So I always look at the why. So why am I in this position making this decision? And sometimes even just that count to 10 rule helps a ton. It's easier said than done. But when your head's telling you something, but your gut's telling you something else, who do I go with, right? So I definitely look at the why and how it'll impact someone or people or the key stakeholders down the road. And even if the decision doesn't benefit me per se, it's at least we know we're at peace with what we chose to do. it's almost like taking a deal or not taking a deal. Sometimes we want to take the deal because it's an opportunity to make money, but it might not be the right deal. So what goes into deciding if it's the right or not right deal?
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, just asking the why behind it. Why is it that I'm doing this? What's the long-term implication, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And this is, the sort of impact that's going to happen from making the decision, the stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. So it's good stuff, good feedback. Okay, so there's a type, again, so type 1, if you think about it, and type 2, so we can sort of delineate when we're trying to make decisions between things, is a type 1 is, again, more impact, bigger consequence that can happen from it. It's kind of a one-way door. Okay, you can't really unwind that one, and so that's sort of a type 1 when we're making decisions as a company. Type 2 is, these are, most decisions aren't like type 1. So I would say most of the choices and decisions you're going to make in your life and here at the company are probably going to be more type 2. They're changeable, they're reversible, they're what we would call a two-way door, okay? If we used an analogy of a boat, most of them are going to be above the water line. So if you shoot through the boat, it's not going to sink it, if that makes sense. So it's most of the choices you're going to make are going to be kind of a two-way door coming in and out, so you can unwind that. And most of the type 2 decisions, just to give you some context on it, would be more operational. So as opposed to strategic, they're more in the operations. They're things that are happening day to day. They're system-oriented, process-oriented, operational things that are going to take place. And again, this is more changing how you are doing it, right? Because we talked about earlier what you are doing. So the functionality of these little choices that you're making throughout the day are how you are doing things. So again, just think in terms of when we're thinking in our purview here in our cultures, we're always thinking of type 1, type 2. Most of the time you're going to be thinking type 2, generally speaking. And so that it just sort of, and that's a good way for us to help delineate too, as a culture, when we're trying to come together and make a decision, is saying, okay, first place to start, we kind of dealing with a type 1 or with type 2? And that'll help start the process for us to go through this. So let's just go through a couple of examples, just, to think through this. So type 2 is issue with the lender not responding in time, right? That happens a lot. We have to make a decision about that. But that's operational in nature, right? It's a two-way door. Depending on how we respond, it's not going to be, irreversible, but it's sort of an operational, functional thing. So we have to make a decision. What do we do with that? And it's not this huge thing, but it's just operationally something we're going to deal with, probably, on a fair amount of time, as Lana can attest, right?
Mm-hmm.
An issue with the borrower not responding. I know that never happens. So with what we need, right? So you're requesting information, you're not getting something, so you have to respond to the decision as to, okay, am I gonna, how am I gonna respond to this particular situation here? Change in terms by the lender. This is probably a type 2 as well. Might seem like a type 1. There could be instances where it is. But again, not going to be the end of the world, but it is something we need to address, make a decision about, and then proceed. Someone does not pay our fee. That's another, decision that we have to deal with. I know that that's never happened, Tom, right?
Maybe once. Maybe once.
Maybe not. But there's times we run into that where someone wakes up and goes, I just don't want to pay. So that's a thing that we have to say, well, what do we do? How do we deal with these situations? How do we respond? Or another one, borrower becomes rude or agitated. Lon, I think you've run into that a few times.
Mhm.
And then running into a process that's slowing things down or just not proactive, right? We're dealing with this all the time. So I'm just kind of giving you some examples that we're running into. Can you guys think of any other examples that would be kind of a type 2 operational type of thing that you might be running into when you're making decisions throughout the day?
Hmm.
I guess that last one. I mean, we're always not just running into processes that slow things down, but always coming into new processes that we're trying to put together. Sometimes it's a kind of a test this out and see how that goes. That's definitely type 2, easy to change, easy to correct.
Yeah, so again, so systems, processes, which is part of our culture. How do we build out systems? So we're always just running into that. We can unwind it. It's not the end of the world. It's changing all the time. Tom and I spent a lot of time building out the metrics for his position. So we were just making decisions all the time as to how we were going to sort of deal with things as well. So that's good, Tom. Anything on your else, Lana, that you're thinking about that might be sort of type 2 decisions that you're running into that we haven't hit on?
Well, I think you pretty much hit the main ones that I run into a lot.
Yeah, I know.
So those overrule a lot of the other type 2s.
Yeah.
So
It's good. Yeah, it's good. So good. So I'm trying to give you kind of a model to go off of. So again, we got a type 1, type 2. Here's sort of some examples of those things. And let me give you some examples of a type 1. Making a new hire. We just did that, right? That's not a quick process we do. We have a very, pretty lengthy process of vetting and, things that take place. But bringing somebody on new, we're just about to bring on another individual, Dan. And so that's a long process. That's a lot of interviews, other people involved, checking references. It's a slow, methodical, thought out process because it has a big impact, right? It can have a big impact either to the positive, right, which is what we're having with Dan, or it could be on the negative, and we've had that on the other side. But it just and it's not that easy to just sort of unwind that. It's a lengthy process. So that would be considered a type 1 type of decision that we're having to make. Choosing a new lender to partner with. Sometimes we have made quick decisions about that. It's probably bit us in the butt. And when you're in the middle of it, you're kind of going, crap, what do we do now? And it's hard to unwind that. And so, as we keep growing, as we keep aiming towards this being the most proactive commercial mortgage broker in the world, then we're basically having to be more methodical. Tom spends a lot of time vetting, talking, communicating with lenders because that has a big impact, right? Either again to the positive, you think about a Commerce Bank, a MacU, some of these other people we've partnered with. And then there's the other side of the coin, right? Where there's some other groups that I'll name nameless that just have not been, fruitful to the other side. So that's something we have to continue to be methodical about and say, okay, we want to, hitch our wagon here because it has impacts on all fronts. Penetrating a new market. If we were going to expand, we're going to plan on expanding here into some other markets over the next year. And so that's not just something you wake up and go, oh, cool, let's jump in. It takes some thought. It's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of people involved in that process. And there's quite a bit of runway, before you land the plane, so to speak, where a type 2 is more kind of, hey, I can jump and go and do. A type 1 is, you're like, I need a lot of landing strip before I make this choice, month, couple months, you know, you might need some time to really let that bake before you make the choice, you know, so to speak. So anyways, I'll stop there for a minute. Thoughts or comments on some of those examples, or anything that you want to chime in, or anything I can help clarify on?
I'm good. I totally understand the um, time in making a decision. Some decisions take a lot more time than others. So
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, they do. Sometimes we can also try to take a type 1 approach to maybe something that's a type 2. You know what I mean? Like we're like,
right,
well, you know, we're spending way too much time on something that we're just kind of like, yeah, probably need to type 2 that and not make it a type 1. And then vice versa. We could make a type, you know, 1 decision and do a type 2 approach where we're just too quick about it. And we're like, oh man, what did I just do? And I think all of us have done both of those,
right.
if we're honest, right?
Like unforeseen consequences on a type 1 decision.
Right, yeah. And we're like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Yeah, so there's some examples of those things, and I wanted to do that just so you guys kind of started to see and go, okay, now I'm tracking with you as to the distinction when we're going through as a company and making choices together. And again, this is to give you power, to empower you, because that's what we want to do here. We don't want to cut all this. We want to give you the reins. You know, there's companies that are what we would consider vertical. So you have lots of these like vertical layers. Tom, if we use an example of banks we choose, you know, if like a Wells Fargo, and again, I'm not making a negative comment. I'm just saying it's a fact. There's just a lot of layers, right, to get to decisions, right? And we want to be more horizontal, where we're sort of nimble and making decisions and not so sort of, you know, integrated, where we feel like there's just this red tape where we keep having to go through this and this and this to get a choice to do something. We want to try to right size that so that we can be more nimble, and I think for us to be really proactive, that's critical for us to have that kind of methodology internally here, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yep.
So here, let's just spend a few minutes talking about the funnel of decision making. So I've given you some clarity, some delineation on what it is. So I think you have some clarity on that. But now you're saying, well, okay, that's great, Dave, but like, how do we, you know, what's the process of actually making a decision, you know? So you know, when you start to do this, and the reason why processes are so important, I think you guys need to, I think you know this, but I think it also helps to reiterate it, is process helps peace of mind. Okay, I want you to think about that for a minute. Process helps peace of mind. So if I have a real specific process that I'm going through, I mean, you know, if we use an example of a Starbucks coffee or a McDonald's hamburger, they have a very specific process they go through to get that perfect burger, right? Or to get that perfect cup of coffee. And so what it does is it sort of takes some of the anxiety out of it. It's like, okay, well, no, I just do this and this and this and this, and then we have a burger, right? And so it gives peace of mind because you just know, hey, I just have to kind of follow these steps, and then we should have sort of an outcome. And not all situations have an outcome we would want, but at least gives us the peace of mind to say, I'm just going to follow this process to go through. And if I stick with this, then I think I'll have better odds to make a better decision than, you know, a worse one, if that makes sense. So process helps peace of mind. So just kind of think about that for a minute. So here's sort of the funnel of decision making, or what we call methodology. Okay, So the first question you might ask ourselves, we might ask ourselves, when we're making a decision here at the firm, is this. And you could take this into your own personal life too, if you have your own personal vision and where you're kind of heading. Does this decision get us closer, right, or further from our vision, right? Pretty simple question, but can be pretty powerful. You know, is this person we're going to partner with get us closer or further from our vision, right? Does this process we're going to be doing get us closer or further from our vision? You know, do these things we're trying to do get us closer or further from our vision? Is it, and basically the question really is this just helping us get more proactive or less? Probably a good first question to ask. Why do you think I would ask that question? What do you think?
Well, if you are not making a decision with whether it's something that you do or somebody that you work with or whatever the case may be, if you're making, you know, your goal is to stay close to your vision and be proactive. And so if you're not being mindful of that, then you start to lose, I feel like you would start to lose your vision and you wouldn't be as proactive. So, you know, I think that was the question that you were
Yeah.
asking.
No, that's really good, Lana. That's really good, because what you're saying is that just going through that process and having it your top of mind,
Mhm.
and you are baking that into the culture of how you're even making decisions. And remember, if we don't have a vision, you know, the Bible always tells us people perish. And the notion behind that, or the wisdom behind that, is if you don't know where you're going, then you'll end up exactly where it is you're heading, right? So, which is nowhere. And so if you don't have a clear destination, then
Mhm.
you're ending up nowhere. So,
Right.
so vision does a lot of things, but one of the things it does is it helps us make decisions. Because
Right.
saying, well, does this help us? Is this a person that's going to help us become more proactive? No. Guess what we do? Guess what we decide to do? Not work with them, right?
Don't partner with them. Yeah.
Don't partner with them. And so it makes your decisions a lot more easy. Like you're just like, no. And so that's just a good starting place to say, is this going to get us closer to being proactive, or is it getting us further away? And if the answer is it's definitely further away, okay, you probably are going to get to a decision pretty quick, or at least it starts narrowing things down more, right? And if the answer is yes, then we keep kind of going through this process. And this is, again, another reason we have our mission and our core convictions. I'm gonna pick on you guys or put you on the spot a little bit. Can anybody name one of our core convictions? Okay, peace of mind. Well, the peace of mind is the why. That's good. Yeah, that's good. You're getting it. I used to hammer Tom about this all the time. Tom, you better know one of our core convictions.
This our chase model,
Yes, sir.
our basically or chase with the first one would be the Christ model, that others are more important than us. We need to do what's right for them, the client.
Sorry. Yeah. So that's like a good starting place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is this really in the best interest of the client that we're doing right now? And if the answer is no, then we're like, okay, I think we're getting closer to a decision here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I being honest here? Right? That's the H.
Yeah, honesty no matter the consequences.
Yeah, exactly. Am I applying candid but gracious here? Is that how I'm going to be able to make this decision? Is there a system that should be put in place here? Am I following through and executing? So again, it just is a way for you to methodically just walk through those things and say, I don't think this is helping us get to those places. Tom, And Tom, an example of that, as you and I know, is what sets us apart from everybody else out there is that we don't crank up the client's rate so that we can get more money, right?
I'll never forget the call from that broker I had the other month where he said, I told this guy we can get it done at 5%, so I'll just tell him you're my good buddy and you can charge him 2.5. I was like, oh man, you are not a good person.
Mhm.
Yeah. So again, you got your core convictions, and those should drive the decision at the end of the day. So it gives us a framework for which we say, okay, that does not get us closer to our core convictions. The beauty of it is all of us are accountable to that, including myself. Right? Is I'm like, okay, I think I failed there because I deviated from our own core convictions.
I almost think about it as like every decision you make has an outcome. And then the consistency of the decision-making process leads to more favorable outcomes. So that's how I find like the chase model is perfect because it creates consistency. We know exactly what's going into the decision. The outcome will most likely be more favorable at a higher
Yes.
rate. But then also the outcome will generally be in favor of the process that we have.
That's good. It's good. Yeah. So the idea of you guys have heard me say before, compounding decisions, where you think about compounding interest, and you put a bunch of money when you're young, and all of a sudden you wake up and it's a big chunk of money, and it's because you just kept kind of putting money away, and it compounds upon itself. And so the same thing happens with decisions, where if we fall in line with this will cumulatively grow over time. So again, we talk about vision, mission, and our core convictions. And then once we funnel through that, it might be a stopping point, we just kind of know. But if we keep going, it says, well, what happens if I don't make this decision, right? It's a good question to ask. What happens if I don't make the decision? And then you get to kind of ponder what happens. Is that going to be disastrous? Is it going to cause some issues? And then you can even ask the converse question: what happens if I do make the decision? Right. So here you go on a little bit of a tipping scale, right? Saying, well, what happens if I don't? Okay, is it more negative than if I do? Okay, so why do you think that might be helpful when you're trying to figure out of whether I'm going to make a decision?
And sometimes, I mean, you have to make a decision either way. That if you don't make a decision, if it's a negative, you're making a decision,
Yeah,
and
right.
either way, you've made a decision. You just made a decision not to make a decision.
Right. You made a choice not to make a choice, right? It's still a choice.
Yeah. You can't wash your hands of it and say, I didn't do it. I didn't do that. Well, you caused it, so it's your decision.
It's kind of like the most recent thing Tommy dealt with, where the bank was kind of like, not our problem, right?
Yep.
But now think about this for a minute. By making that non-decision, if we want to use that for terminology, that's going to have a long-term implication, right? Because how many more times do you think we're going to go there and do work?
None.
So that was not a good long-term decision, and it also was positive for us because it helped us go, okay, now we see what happens when the heat gets turned up, and find out how people actually respond. So that's correct. Dan, did you have something you wanted to chime in on?
I was thinking about it where if sometimes when things are tough, you can choose to make a decision to just not respond and hopefully it just kind of goes away. Or you can decide to face the challenge of the hard part. So that could happen in any way. Like, maybe I was talking to someone and they asked me information I didn't know and I chose not to respond, not knowing, but then I promised them I would get back to them with an answer. and then I just choose not to respond after weeks of time. So then that
Yeah.
automatically disqualifies me as a strategic partner to them.
Yeah.
Or even like I promised Dave I'd send him my touches for the week, and then I just lost track of all my touches because I wasn't actually recording them correctly.
Yeah.
So I hope that Dave just forgets, and maybe we can move on from that. So that has a long-term implication of the trust that we have built.
Yeah, exactly. That's good, Dan. Yeah. So all these little decisions, we will keep using this in here, compounding choices that accumulate to something, right? Either positive or negative. And I guess the final one that just goes hand in glove, which is sort of methodology that we will use in here. And we can come back and reference this as well as we impact things, is what's the cost? What's the impact? What happens if we do this? What's the is there a literal cost for doing this or for not doing this? So again, that goes hand in glove with the other thing, and I won't belabor it. But again, sometimes there's just an emotional cost, right? Sometimes there's a relational cost, and sometimes there's an actual physical cost, and sometimes all three of them. Quite candidly. Most recent experience we had with the gentleman not paying the fee. All three of those are in play. There's an emotional thing that happens there, kind of like, man, I'm hurt. I can't believe that, that happened. And there's a relational thing where all of a sudden it's like, gosh, I don't think we're going to work together anymore. And the parting ways there. And there's a physical, right? There's a big number there that just went bye-bye. So, I think those things are the methodology that we'll use in here. We might have some things to add, as we always do. We're innovating and getting better all the time. But, this is a good, simple, I don't like to make things too complicated because then you just don't do anything. But, funnel of decision-making just gives us some way to start making decisions as a firm, as a team, as we go. So now we just are going to, okay, so if we're ready to just make a decision, if it's a type 2 decision from your assessment, here's my response to you, and here's my freedom to you, from me to you. Make it, and make it fast, okay? If it's a type 2 decision, feel free to make it. And that's okay, because remember, we've talked about this, and we're going to keep hearing this as well. We're all about successful failure. Let's make this choice, and and then take action, communicate with me, or whoever ends up being, whoever the manager is down the road. Just communicate what you did, and then we'll monitor the results, right? And then we'll make a decision. So just if it's a type 2 decision, and you sort of went through your little process, and that'll become easier as we go. But just make the choice, make the decision, and do it. Lana did this. She just took charge. She made a decision. She I'm trying to keep giving you guys the freedom to make the choice and do it, and be empowered to go out and make those decisions. There's the old adage that this half-baked 70% done business plan implemented is 10 times better than the one that's, perfect and never actually gets implemented, right? Where you're trying to make everything perfect and put every little dot and T and double check. So they say if you get to about 70% information, make the choice, right? Because going to the extra 80 or 90 or 100, it's probably not going to really make that big of a difference, okay? So I just want to give you guys that freedom at this firm to just have the choice and go. And, have that kind of little bit of entrepreneurial spirit, and you say, okay, I'm going to make the decision. And we'll have a successful failure of coming back and saying, hey, you tried it. Great. Okay, we failed. That's okay. We're a candid but gracious firm, so we'll accept our failures. That's our culture here. But then we'll learn from it, and we'll go, okay, you know what? Great. Well, what do we change, for next time? And that's, we're never going to know if we don't try. We're never going to wake up one day and have major innovation. Amazon didn't become a multi-billion-dollar company by just not making a bunch of choices. They took chances, they made innovations, they had the ability to do things, and there they go. If it's a type 1 decision from your assessment, okay, well that's, and this is going to take more time to flush this out. We might end up doing a second one just for the sake of time, but put together a 2-page scope. You might see a bigger thing that you go, gosh, guys, there's something bigger here, strategic, that we could be doing that really would like drive us like the accelerator to a more proactive firm. And it might be a real strategic, bigger sort of thing that has a large impact, for us. Well, that's probably going to take a little bit more time, and you'll present it to your manager. And so I have sort of the scope narrative format that we'll all have access to. But what's kind of the statement of purpose? Like, what is it that we're trying to do with this, type 1 decision that we're trying to do, where we're saying, okay, here's the main objective of this initiative or strategy or larger thing that we want to try to do as a firm, that you're going to have to kind of think through and start typing that out. Then you have to start thinking about what questions will people ask. If we make this decision, what questions might people start asking us internally and externally? And almost like an FAQ. One of the things we do at the firm here when we're hiring, I've already put together I don't know if it's a 2 or 3-page document for people who are looking to work with us with all the questions they're probably going to ask. What's the commission? How much is this? And what is involved? All these things that I want them to go through first, so that we don't have to answer those, because it just helps them kind of make decisions at the end of the day. So we want to kind of think through what would happen, what questions would people be asking us if we made this decision, and how the impact would be. Define the user interaction. How would it work? If we made this big strategic move, if we, like, let's say it was a technology thing and we made this big thing, like, how would it work? Let's say we made an app, for commercial brokers or something that helped them make better decisions on the deals they did. How would that work? What would it look like? What would be the user interface that they would utilize? And so you kind of want to think through that and type that out to help you sort of clarify that. Give instructions on how it would work, and that goes hand in glove with this, but what would be the functionality of the steps that people would take to actually use it, which is an important part of the decision-making process. And then here are just some questions to ask is who's the customer? So if we come up with a big initiative, here's the reality, guys. It's customer-centric. Like, we're trying to ask ourselves, how do we delight the customer? How do we knock their socks off? What does that look like? And who are they? Who is it that we're serving in this particular situation? Let's just say we came up with an app that was for the benefit of commercial brokers. That would be our customer right there. Or maybe it's the small business owner. We want to know who it is, who we targeting. What is the customer problem or the opportunity? What is it? If we're ever coming up with something that's strategic and it's big and it's literally solving a problem. If you think about our firm, the whole vision, honestly, over my 17 years came formulated out of this number one problem that I kept seeing was, holy cow, this is the most reactive industry I've ever seen, where stuff just comes up all the time. So it literally is coming up out of a massive problem that we're seeing within the industry. So we want to identify what is that major problem that people keep running into where we're trying to solve that particular problem. What is the most important customer benefit? What would be the major thing they would get out of it? You want to be real singular on that, how we would really benefit them. And then how do you know what the customer needs? You know, did you talk to some people? I've done this before. When we did the hot money and started doing that, I talked to a handful of brokers. And I was like, what do you want? Like, what do you need? And so they started telling me. And so we built it based upon that, based on their needs. So we just, you know, you don't know unless you don't ask. And then finally is, what does the customer experience look like? I mean, if you guys think about it, we take this for granted all the time, but, and I keep using, you know, the same example, but there's a purpose for it. You know, Starbucks, you know, I mean, they're huge and they've done a fantastic job, whether you like it or not. They did a lot of work to figure out what was that customer experience going to look like? What was the layout when they walked in? What was it going to smell like, feel like, taste like? You know, all those things, they went through a pretty lengthy process to really ask those questions and say, what is the customer experience look like? And that might be a question as we come up with some bigger strategic solutions for our firm, is to really say, like, what is that? What do we want more experience to look like for our customers? Like, how do we make that better for them? And that's part of the fun, is that we get to come up with these things. So I know that's a lot to digest. What questions do you have, or things could I clarify for you?
I think it's good that we're like empowered to kind of take a step back and you know, we're faced with something that, you know, could, you know, might not have a exact system down for it, but can take a step back and say, okay, really ultimately, is this, you know, does this fall into a type 1 or a type 2 decision, and just kind of move ahead with it. You know, definitely it's a good feeling. I like that, to be honest. You know,
It simplifies the thought, you know, like having this discussion, this training. It's a good, you know, and reminder. It's good to, you know, go back to kind of, you know, basics, really. You know, so it's very beneficial, and I can relate a lot of it to like different scenarios that, you know, I've run across, and I'm like, okay, that would be that type 1, that would be type 2, or oh yes, candid but gracious, or, you know, just different things. It's just like, it's a good it's just good to be reminded, and to go over it and to keep it fresh. You know, it's like exercising. You know, you got to continue to exercise, you know, your goals, visions, and things like that, to keep it in the forefront.
Yeah. Dan, did you want to say something before?
Yeah, I also look at it as like an efficiency, because decisions sometimes, they, like in my last organization, for instance, like if I had to make a decision for a customer that would directly impact our business, sometimes I keep them waiting for a week, 2 weeks, because I had to get the right decision maker to make the decision on my behalf.
Right.
Where I already knew the decision and what it was going to be, but I couldn't really say it unless I got that right agreement. So this flat style is actually going to help us be more proactive and achieve our mission and vision, because we're making those decisions. But even if we make the wrong decision, we're not going to be reprimanded for it. We're going to be, you know, obviously educate on how to adjust later, but it's okay.
No, that's good. Yeah. So yeah, I like all those. So yes, you are empowered. I want you to feel free to make these type 2 decisions and make them fast. And if you and then let us know about them. You know, we want to communicate back to everybody and say, hey, I did this and it went well. And you know what? That just might be something that ends up getting implemented within the system. It's like, great, let's do it. Let's take charge, because the more you do that, it's going to make it so much more proactive, so much easier for you and the client. And that just creates long-term sustainability for everybody, right? Because we're actually in the business of adding value to the customers and clients. So, and then, you know, obviously you're correct, Lana. This is one of the reasons, there's a few, but why we have all these sort of cadences in our week. It just, because we keep going back through and reiterating a lot of the same stuff. You know, poor Dan has been on this week and just hearing the same thing over and over. But there's a reason for it, you know, so that it kind of gets into a psyche of like, okay, that's how I do this, right? That's how we do things here at Integrity Capital. And that's the beauty of it, is that you guys get to make those choices, and we do. We want you to be okay with a successful failure. What is not a successful failure is you keep doing the same thing over 10 times, right? That's not a successful failure.
That's a problem.
That's a problem, right? And
So
so,
you wouldn't go for us saying, "Hey, Dave, this is a successful
come on.
failure." Remember?
I've learned this 5 times now, Dave.
Yeah, this is the 10th successful failure we've had of the same thing.
Successfully continuing to fail.
Made that a rhythm for me. So yeah, I mean, it's just, but you need to be okay with those appropriate guardrails to really go out and say, you know what, let's go for it. You know, most people, one of the major regrets that people have at the end of their life, and there's a few, but one of them I found interesting was that someone didn't take the risk. Someone didn't take the chance. So we want you to have the freedom to make decisions, to feel empowered, because you are the reason why the client's going to have a successful or not a successful experience. It's not always on you. I'm just saying, you know, there's other factors, but you're a big reason why. I mean, Lonnie, you're a big reason why today, you know, that, you know, Mike was so happy.
Mhm.
And Dan's going to be a reason why, you know, so many clients had great experiences. And Tom has had numerous times where, you know, clients have just been so elated and thankful. You know, a lot of the reviews we have is because of you guys online. So my point to that is that, you know, you're a part of this. And so you know, I'm giving you that power to make decisions in that type 2 category. And then as we see a type 1 come along, we'll go through this process. And we'll start putting a stake in the ground and start asking these questions and putting a document together. I'll circulate this document after to everybody. But I do want you guys to experience and know that this is how we want to do things here. It's one of the building blocks, so to speak, that we have to have in order to move toward being a proactive, the most proactive commercial mortgage market company in the world. For us to be able to have that kind of success is continuing to do these things to grow and refine what we're doing. So that's the training for today, making decisions. We'll probably revisit this at some point, but as we go through this, you know, as a leaving sort of a landing strip on it is, you know, if it's a type 2 and you see that it's there, you go through those quick questions, make the choice, dive in. If you see it's a type 1, then start that process and communicate with us, communicate with me at this point as to, hey, here's what I did, here's how it turned out, here's what I'm thinking about doing, and I want to give you guys that freedom to do that. So again, this is making decisions, you know, for here at Integrity Capital. So thanks everybody for taking the time, and we'll lead you back to your day.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys. Bye.